Diablo 4 has a massive problem, and I believe it stems from, I guess you could say, three sort of avenues of negativity entering the game. Now, as I've said on every video, I like to talk about Diablo 4. I personally believe it's a really, really amazing game. I gave it an 8 out of 10 out of the beta, expecting it to, have a lot more for the end game. But a lot of people have a lot of varying issues with the game, some reasonable, some not so reasonable. And I want to talk about what that's done in terms of the community and the overall outlook on Diablo 4. And you might say that it's just a minority, don't listen to the vocal minority. However, I would wager that it's actually not necessarily a minority. In a sense, it's not a small group. It may be a minority of the entire audience, but it's not a small group. We're talking about tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people that feel this way and are perpetrating this sort of narrative about Diablo 4. Let's talk about it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is what I consider the beta problem. What do I mean by the beta problem? Well, I mean that everyone seems to have figured out the game and has gotten a set perspective or judgment. And to be fair, I myself am slightly included in that, although I've constantly said, I think that there's going to be a lot of different improvements coming in to the game as we enter the actual launch. But more so than not, the negative outlook or perspective is purely based on what we've seen in the beta, and they're judging everything that Diablo does or the developers do based on this. Now, I have actually a ton of examples of this. First off, we're actually going to show into the end game the post that Diablo made just the other day. I actually made a video on this doing a little summary. It wasn't anything particularly super exciting. It wasn't anything super, negative about the game. It was a lot of things we already knew, and yet this post has like a 55% dislike rate as of recording this video, and I'll show an example here. It may be even larger now. It is crazy how many people are just hating on this post. It is truly crazy. This reminds me of like some of the Diablo Immortal releases. Honestly, Diablo Immortal probably didn't even get this much hate from what I remember when they were releasing their kind of press releases. So having Diablo 4 have this kind of dislike ratio is extremely surprising. And just a quick look through some of the top upvoted comments in the video itself, the most upvoted comment is, I think, a little bit of a meme, but honestly, a lot of people actually agree with this, and that is the Druid Paragon board should have plus 17 damage. And it has 1.9k likes. It is a meme, so I'm not going to read too much into this, but I think a lot of people actually are just hardcore flaming Blizzard for the Druid imbalance in terms of the leveling compared to some of their classes. The second one here, the end game will be like getting 85 keys for the dungeon door to open. People are just absolutely flaming the repetitiveness that we found in the beta. Granted, I do think there is some, I guess you could say, validity to some of these criticisms, but it is constant, right? It is constant. Another one, everyone mentioning how Paragons are boring with +5 stats. They missed one important thing. You can actually rotate the Paragon board and get +5 stats from other angles. This is also just an exaggeration. I mean, for some reason, even if it was, let's say, +5 stats, I don't think it's anything too different from a lot of other games for the most part, right? For example, in Diablo 3, it's literally just stats the whole way through. But if you guys actually do a deep dive, which I actually have done on the Paragon system, each board has 6 rare nodes that are going to give you exceptionally unique bonuses to your class, and then 1 legendary node for an exceptionally unique bonus as well, and several different magic nodes that give you specific stats, not just your main attributes. So this isn't even a proper representation of the Paragon boards, although I will say Blizzard themselves didn't do a good job of showcasing that in the video. And I could keep on going with all these different negative comments, and I'll just drop a few here. But what the point of this is that everyone's coming in and they've experienced and they've heard a lot of these reviews from the beta. And to be fair to a lot of these criticisms, they are mostly true in that the dungeons do feel repetitive. The Druid was imbalanced, in my opinion, compared to the other classes. There were a lot of, I guess you could say, simplicity in the Paragon tree. Or rather, the skill tree, not necessarily the Paragon tree, because we haven't really experienced that in the beta. But that leads me to my next point, which is managing expectations. And I've said this numerous times, and some people seem to disagree with me, like, no, the game's actually not meant for that audience. And I don't know where that kind of perspective is coming from, and that is that Diablo is a casual player's audience. Ever since Diablo 3. Diablo 2 is definitely one of the more hardcore audiences, but remember that game was made back in the 2000s, early 2000, I think it was 2002, if I'm not mistaken. And that means that during that time, the gamers that were even playing weren't casual gamers for the most part. The people that were playing games were more dedicated, because in order to own a console, in order to own a PC to play these games, you actually needed to invest some time and to acquire those resources. Whereas now, having a computer, having a console is so commonplace that people could just pick up and play a game randomly. It wasn't as nearly as niched down, I guess you could say. And so during that time, appealing to those more hardcore player bases was the way to go. Nowadays, Diablo 3 is a pure arcade style game where you can load up, play it for a couple days, and max out the entire game, every season, that is. And I think that that's a good thing for the average player. The average player only has a few hours a week to even play the games. And so logging on to Diablo 3, running a couple rifts, logging off is the ideal situation for a lot of these people to not feel like they're becoming super, super far behind. Now, obviously, every game's going to have their min-maxing as well, but keeping the game's systems simplistic, such as the Diablo 3 Paragon system, or potentially the skill and rune system, or giving set items. And the same thing with Diablo 4, which is, getting a simplistic skill tree, having, simplistic content that is repeatable and easily able to be accessed, is the kind of point of appealing to a wider audience. I think no one will disagree with me when I say the average casual audience is way larger than the average hardcore audience. Why is that? Well, the hardcore audience can only be, and when I say hardcore, by the way, I mean people that play a lot, can only be a small portion, because if you are not in that hardcore area where you want those harder difficulties, those harder skill trees, the ability to do all this different content, you don't have that kind of time, then you're not going to be able to participate in the game nearly as much, okay? So I don't think anyone will disagree with me that the casual audience is usually typically much larger in most games, but some people disagree in that the game is designed for that casual audience. And I would say that, well, everything that points to it, whereas like, hey, we don't have a lot of uniqueness in these dungeons. We don't have a complicated skill tree. A lot of these nodes are +5, stats, even though I don't think that's a proper characterization. These are all indicative of appealing to a more casual audience, right? Making the game more simplistic and easy to understand, while also getting a lot of value out of it, right? So I think that a lot of people are super negative because they're coming into this game and they want it to be something that it's not, which is the new Path of Exile, or the new really complicated Diablo 2 with rune words and all that stuff, versus Diablo 3. And when I say really complicated, I don't mean like it's impossible to learn, but compared to Diablo 3, it is way more complicated. And I think everyone would kind of agree with that if you guys have played Diablo 2 and Diablo 3. And so I think that managing expectations is extremely important. And in this, day and age, when we have an infinite amount of content to consume, betas to go through, managing expectations is extremely important to not have this wave of negativity wash over us. And I think that in this case, Diablo itself is, or the group rather, Blizzard, are the people's responsible for managing those expectations, putting out a press release saying, hey, this is not going to be a pay-to-win game. Hey, this is not going to be a super hardcore game. We're going to appeal to that casual audience. And granted, they don't have to do that. And perhaps it might be, marketing suicide. That could be a potential. But I think that at the end of the day, if you don't manage expectations, you are bound to have this wave of negativity wash over it for people that are not getting what they want. But those people are typically your average, more hardcore player. Then the last prong of this problem is gatekeeping. Now, this most often happens when we're talking about the game in a larger setting. There is a large group of people that do not want you to associate with any Blizzard game, do not want to associate with any Diablo 4 content because they think it's a bad game, or they don't want you to watch anything or do anything about it because they want to make you play their way. all of these three things end up causing an extremely negative experience in the community. The first thing I'll talk about, again, I have examples for all of these, and I have many comments, but I'm just going to show you guys a couple of examples here. First one, I mean, we have someone saying you should not buy it, game is lazy, always online is a big downside, Blizzard is a hollow shell of a company that do not care about your time. And while I do think that that is partially true, in that Blizzard does have a bad track record of appreciating us, I don't really care about that. I don't really think that people should just be telling people not to buy it and projecting that sort of opinion on other people just based on sitting there and not liking the company. At least for my thoughts, right? Just because if you guys enjoy the game and this is something that you'd have kind of in your life, it's a hobby of yours, someone telling you, hey, you're just a bad person and the game is terrible and they waste your time and you're wasting your time, all this stuff. This ends up just causing a lot of negativity for honestly no reason, right? Just let people play the game if they enjoy the game. Unless, of course, you know, something absolutely miserable happens, which I don't think that has happened yet. The second one is people just critiquing other people or people like myself for making videos on the game. For example, by this guy, most critical advice, don't watch or listen to these people who tell you things when the beta isn't even out yet. This was before the beta. They're just grifters looking for sweet Blizzard money. Just play the beta and have fun. By nature, this comment is hypocritical because by telling people to just play the beta and have fun, they are telling people to listen to themselves over me. My position on this is if you want to watch the video, watch the video. If you don't want to watch the video, don't watch the video. If you want to go and do whatever you want, do whatever you want. But there's a lot of gatekeeping around, no, you shouldn't watch this video because, you know, they're just a shill, or you should definitely watch this video, and if you don't, then you're not knowledgeable enough to talk to me. There's both sides to this. And this happens with any game, to be honest, but there is definitely a focus around Diablo 4 because it's one of the biggest releases, you know, in 20 years or something like that. You know, it's going to be one of the biggest releases in probably Blizzard's history. And so having a ton of people trying to convince people to play their way or listening to what they say instead of someone else is super common, ends up being extremely destructive and ruins a lot of the, I guess you could say, communication between a lot of the different players and content. Now, this last comment comes from a video where I made on the first impressions of the beta here, and this person mentions that the game's absolute dog. It's everything I was hoping it wouldn't be. There's mega copium, people are smoking some mega copium, and it's not D2, D3, etc. So these are a ton of different comments where people are just absolutely thrashing the game and honestly just kind of accusing people of just super huffing some copium, when some people just have different, I guess you could say, preferences than other people. Maybe people like D4 more than the other two, or more than the other Diablo games, like myself, just because I believe that I really enjoy the open world aspect. I enjoy some of the mechanics going on in the game, but for some reason, you know, people just can't help themselves and really just want to thrash on the game without any real criticisms, right? And so there's just all sorts of these types of comments, all sorts of these types of critiques that sort of gatekeep people from even trying it or even having an opinion about it or even consuming any content about it, just because there's so much negativity around it. And I think this ends up being the huge problem around Diablo 4. So I just spent the last 10, 15 minutes, whatever, talking about the, I guess you could say, issues that are stemming from the beta, the previous content and managing expectations, and of course the mass amount of gatekeeping that's coming from people just trying to watch videos or even talk about the game because of the mass amount of hate that it is getting. And that leads me to sort of the conclusion of this video, which is that Diablo 4, and I guess you could say to a lesser extent, every game that comes out has this always massive issue, which is that the pre-launch perspective has always been this mass negativity. They cannot do anything right in terms of, even if they put out a beta or they mention they're going to address something or they put out a video talking about some of the end game. It's never enough. It's never good enough. There's always something to critique, and that's just the nature of massive amounts of consumption on the internet. And this ends up causing a lot of people to have a negative perspective of Diablo 4, which is honestly super unfortunate. So the reason I make this video is to just let, kind of people know is that oftentimes these negative people are really just unrealistic in their expectations, or potentially just unreasonable, or they may have good criticisms to make. However, the game just doesn't necessarily head in that direction, so there will not be any, I guess you say, modification towards the game. So you just have to make sure that you know what you're getting into and expect that, hey, if this is something that's not my cup of tea, then you probably should just move on rather than spreading mass negativity. I don't know, I just tend to try to just enjoy games and have fun rather than pick apart them, especially before the game has even launched. So I think the biggest problem that Diablo 4 has right now is the community and the general perspective on it, not the game itself. And we'll see if they do make some changes. I bet they will. And I also bet that there will be a lot of critique when the game actually launches, in that they probably haven't made a lot of changes that we've asked for. That's just the nature of betas. That's the nature of game launches. And hopefully in the future, we'll see them improve the game, which I have no doubt they will. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. This is definitely a topic that I've been wanting to cover for a while because, well, there's just so much negativity around the game, around everything to do with Diablo, whether you're making content, whether you're just talking about it, whether you're just in the, I guess you could say, relative vicinity of anything Blizzard, you're just gonna get hated on for it, oftentimes by a large group of people. And it shows, especially with that recent trailer that was released, albeit, I will admit, it wasn't the best trailer in terms of the end game and showcasing it, but I don't think it deserved that type of response. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.